So I did the research in the 90s when I was teaching the blues class. I taught about Mississippi, Chicago, Texas, and the Piedmont. That is the four major areas of blues origination. And then I thought, what about Wichita? Because I'd never heard. Well, I heard Jay McShann when he came here in the 70s, but he's really more of a jazz pianist. Although he can throw it down when he has to. Went to a blues conference in St. Louis in the 90s and got to ride with him in a car over to where he was going to play. And I told him I was from Wichita, and I saw him at the Esquire Club. And he said, oh, and then he asked me about a bass player, if he was still there. I don't remember his name, but I didn't know him. Anyway, he came here quite a bit. In fact, he brought Charlie Parker with him one time. And Charlie is in a few of the narratives that I've recorded. So let me read a little bit here. On an early spring day in 1996, without fanfare or appointment, I walked into the Kansas African American Museum, housed in the former Cavalry Baptist Church, where it still is, although they've got a new building they're going to move to. In the original Black neighborhood, just north of downtown, I found a sanctuary with a sloping floor, a baptismal tank behind paneled doors, African sculptures in the small choir area, and a modest period pipe organ. Executive Director Ruby Parker had a master's degree in education, had taught at the college level. I explained my idea of discovering a Wichita style of blues, telling her I would apply for grants. She would get a permanent exhibit out of it. And at first she was reserved because he was this white guy who walked in with an idea to get money using the museum, the way she looked at it. But she gave me a chance. I went before the board. They approved it. I got 3 grants. Although she told me the first time she was notified of a grant being awarded, she didn't know what the heck they were talking about on the phone. But she said, I just said, okay, thank you. Because, they don't, she's got a lot of stuff going on. So I got a grant from the Wichita Community Foundation, the Kansas Humanities Council, and the Kansas Arts Commission. Small grants, very small. Very, very small. But the last one from the Arts Commission gave us a chance to have to hire musicians for the exhibit opening. And 200 people came to that. And they paid $5 each, so they paid for the grant right there. But it was touch and go. Anyway, the way I contacted these people, Barry Harris, anybody heard of him or heard him play? In Wichita, I came from Oklahoma. Muskogee, he was driving a cab in Muskogee. He came here and he was sort of an ambassador of the blues. And I told him what I was going to do, and he said, I can help you out. I will recommend players, because he knew I came in the 50s, but he made friends fast. And so part of the grant was to give the interviewees $50 per interview. Now, I don't know if anybody's done sociological interviews or research. They don't like that. You're not supposed to pay your interviewees because it biases the study. Hey, I broke the rule. And they fought it. the Humanities Council said no. But I said, look, these are musicians. They'll be playing music in the interview, which wasn't entirely always the case. They needed the money. $50 was what a gig paid in the 90s. And some of them, they cashed the check immediately after the interview. One guy, and we'll get to that. Oh yeah, give me the sat.
Go for it, back arrows there.
Okay. One guy had me take him to the grocery store. Shirley Green, he was born in 1916. He played in New York for 15 years, saxophone in big orchestras, played Small's Paradise, played with big name bands. And he had no money. And so he blew some of the $50 on groceries. And then he said, how about taking me to the liquor store? I said, okay. He said, my neighbor will take me for groceries, but he won't take me to the liquor store. So he bought a fifth, I think, of whiskey, got it home and said, look, do you want some of this? And I said, no. And he really got happy. Really. And I asked him, Shirley, do you have any pictures of yourself? And he said, I used to have a real nice one, but some woman came over here and stole it. So let that be a lesson. They'll take stuff. All right, I think that's kind of an introduction. I think I'll just go through hey, it's broken.
Let me see.
Back or front?
The right one should make it go forward.
That's what I thought.
You want it?
Anyway.
Here, I'll just, you just tell me when and I'll do it from here.
Oh, I got it. I got a great bunch of pictures from Topeka. And that's one of them. Also, the Spencer Gallery at KU. KU is very stuffy. Anybody have a degree from that institution? Well, then you know what I'm talking about.
I great. I'll wave the wheat.
See, now, the Ninth Cavalry Band, the Ninth Cavalry were Buffalo soldiers originally in the old time West. The 9th and 10th Cavalry were black troops known as Buffalo soldiers, and they still have an organization, an honorary organization that one of my men that I interviewed still belonged to, Perry Reed. He was the first guy I interviewed. And he said he heard the Ninth Cavalry Band and he saw the uniforms. This was in 1941. And he said, what really impressed me was the uniforms. I went up there to enlist, but he had to wait a month until he could talk his mother into signing up for him because he was underage. And then he was on his way home. And here's where Newton comes into the picture. Newton, Kansas. He was on his way home to Wichita on leave. And it came over the radio on December 7th. Guess what came over the radio? All troops return to base. He heard that in Newton, so he got out and had to go back. So he always had a warm place in his heart for Newton.
Yeah.
But I mean, take a look at that. It's some hard stuff. Let's see. You have to get, there we go. And Tennessee Town was a ghetto. Topeka was founded by abolitionists. Did you know that? And so there were a lot of African Americans there, and the governor, St. John, was very helpful to them. And then, of course, in the 1879, 1880 era, you know what happened. You're nodding your head. You know?
Jim Crow would be a.
No, not Jim Crow. They didn't let him in the state. The Exodusters came. 40,000 African Americans from the South came to Kansas. And Topeka got a bunch of them because, you know, they were good to blacks, and they sent some to Wichita. This is in the book, and Wichita sent it back. Said, no, no, no. So, welcome to Wichita. But how about that? That's a great picture. I mean, take a look at it. That's some hardcore stuff. Tennessee Town was a black area of Topeka, also Mudtown. And there were some others that I'm sure somebody should write about, but I looked at Topeka in the book. Just, you know, when you write a book for a university press, they've got a lot of ideas, and they want to see those ideas put into motion. So that determined a lot of what went in the book. Oddly enough, in their advertising, they say it took 25 years for me to write the book. No, it took them 25 years to publish the book because they turned it down in 1999. But I forgave them. However, I have a feeling that all the major blues people have been written about in the last 30, 25 years. So they're looking for other subjects. That happened in England when they used to bring people over in the 50s and 60s when the blues craze hit London in England. And they ran out of people. You know, they kept getting lower and lower on the echelon of blues greats. Okay, and the chapters in this book are early African Americans in Kansas, cowboys, soldiers, settlers, and minstrels. I did a chapter on minstrels. That came from a paper I read in Arkansas. And then two early urban centers in Kansas, Topeka and Wichita. I compared the two. The rest of it is interviews with the 19 musicians in the original study. So, Louverture School, that's the old Louverture. One of the fellows I interviewed, Dr. Walton Morgan, who taught all the black kids in Wichita. They all went to that school. He had them, I think they went there in 6th, 7th, 8th, something like that. And I forget the lady's name, the choir director, but she was pretty famous. Isn't that a good picture? I mean, noble, a lot of noble attitude in that. And there's another, one of my favorites, because that speaks volumes. That came from a Wichita photographer, Rosie Hughes, who had an exhibit at the African American Museum. She took those pictures in the 40s and possibly 50s and 60s. Her husband actually did most of it. I forget his name. But they sold all their photos to Spencer Museum Research. A lot of them were they wanted them at the museum in Kansas, but in Wichita, but they couldn't afford it. So they're online. You can see them online at the Spencer Research Museum at KU. If you can get in. Sometimes KU won't even let you look at stuff. They're very uppity. Right?
They got some rare collections that they're afraid somebody's gonna steal them.
Yeah, I didn't steal them. I gave him credit and sent him a book too. This is exciting. What happened there? And then Bluebird. Is anybody a Bluebird? That's still Junior Campfire Girl. For those of you who didn't know. Look at that, they're all happy. I think that's a Rosie Hughes photo. It's in the book. Well, wait a minute. This is annoying. There's Shirley Green, Walton Morgan.
I don't know why it's flickering like that, sorry.
You want to mess with it? Just monkey through it. Now that's that's the one who taught everyone. He was real old. He lived with Charlie Parker, according to him, for a week or a few weeks. And he asked Charlie, he's a saxophone player, and he asked Charlie, how do you play like that? And Charlie told him, you have to learn a song back to front. Can you imagine? And others told me that when early in his career, when Charlie showed up to jam, that other musicians would just put their arms in the case. But let's look at the next likely subject. That's Shirley in his home. And he couldn't remember all the recordings he was on, 78s. Right? And then when he came back to Wichita, his New York musician said, oh, you're going back to Kansas City, huh? And he said, yeah, because he said they would never believe I was going to Wichita. So, yeah, let's have it. And that's the drummer in the 9th Cavalry Band, the one who was underage and got in. And he said when he got up there, they needed a drummer. And they said, we'll audition you. So we got there and there was music on the stand. He didn't read music, which is odd because drummers have music. But I guess they do. Anyway, but he said he used to listen to march music, Sousa marches. So he knew all the songs. So he just played like he was reading it right along. I mean, later on, he learned how to read. He was a good musician. Very good. My first guy I interviewed, and the cassette broke. So he said, here, I can fix that. He fixed the cassette for me. We didn't lose the tape. I mean, what a guy. And how about the next one? Chiefs. And that's Gene Metcalf from the 40s, vocalist and pretty wild character, really. He had some ups and downs, and he was killed because he was running a bootleg. After I interviewed him, he was running a bootleg beer business out of his house, and some kids knocked him. I've been to that house quite a few times. They used to have parties there with Chino, some guy named Chino. Anyway, let's try that. Oh, there's Barry, hamming it up. He was the biggest ham you could ever see. Quite well known. He won awards in Oklahoma. And very erudite African American gentleman. You know, he knew his interview, he had 2 in here, really tells the story. He looks deeply into the Black consciousness. And he also was a little upset at the musicians in Wichita for not. See, once you get categorized as a blues player in the African American community, you're down there. You know, jazz is here, blues is down here. And by the 90s, that was far in the rearview mirror. By the 60s, it was in the rearview mirror because they move on. Okay, how about another? Now, I used to have some pants like that. You remember those?
Yeah.
70s.
I mean, and look down on the bottom. You recognize anybody on the floor?
The drum.
Barry Harris on the left with an afro. Afro Barry.
He's not.
I mean, that's a heavy photo. There's some more like that. Harold Carey, he drove the Burma Road in World War II that brought supplies to China for their, he was also a dental technician and was in a USO show. Very talented pianist, but he learned the piano from a minstrel back in the, must have been late 20s. And the minstrel named Jake, that's all he knew, played everything on the black keys. In other words, D flat. Everything was in D flat. So he could play anything. Satin Doll, anything. He played at the Candle Club all over Wichita. He broke the color barrier, really, because at the time you couldn't, blacks couldn't play south of Central. And he had a radio show at Wichita State in the afternoon on campus. When KMUW was a crystal set. You know what a crystal set is. You're one up on me. And
What's a crystal set?
oh, it's kind of a homemade, you know, you could make it in Boy Scouts, you could listen to it. It was a real low power thing, very low power.
To full powered, so it's very, so you could maybe hear it on the edge of campus kind of thing.
Yeah.
Or
So, and there's a young Mr. Carey. He was, there's a story in the book. I hate to blow all the good stories, but this one, there's a lot of them in there. This one's kind of funny. He said, what could happen to me? I was playing on South Broadway. I mean, if you think that wasn't redneck country back then, he said, which it was. So he's playing along with the piano, and all of a sudden, this woman starts taking her clothes off behind him, putting them on the piano. She was a professional. Then he said the men started looking at me real mean. They weren't watching her, they were watching him to see if he'd turn around and watch. And he said that was scary. And they didn't tell him they had a stripper in the show, you know. It was hard luck, but he got the money. I used to go visit him on around 13th and Hydraulic. He had a 6-cylinder Mustang that he drove around to performances. And he had there was one bassist in town that could play in his key. You know, that's a rough, if you're a musician, and there's blues in A, no, blues in D sharp or D flat. Okay, that's hard to do. They could do it. There was one guy who could play with him, so he was happy. Let's try the next one. Arthur Bates, he was from Oklahoma, played in big bands, played the Tulsa Ballroom, unamplified. That's a stand-up he's got with him. I said, how did you, and he said, 5,000 people. I said, how did you play unamplified? He said, you turn your bass into, play into a corner. And he said, the guy who had hand jive, who was that? Come on, this is
Johnny Oates.
who?
Johnny Oates.
Yeah, Johnny Otis came to town and wanted him to come with him, play bass. And he said, I couldn't do it. It was way too loud. I wouldn't last 2 weeks. And this was back in the 50s. Now think how loud it is. It's terrible. So he gave me a lot of good stories. He knew a lady in the Sweethearts of Rhythm, which was from a college in Mississippi or trade school, something like that. And he said, do they have a boys band? Because she played in that. And he said, yeah. So he wrote him a letter and said, I'd like to join the band. I play bass. And then they just showed up at his house 2 weeks later. Come on, we got a gig. That's the way to do it. That's the power of the written word. How many of you write letters anymore? Oh, you do? Not bad. How about the next one? Okay, the Mambo Club. Anybody heard of that? There's a British blues magazine called Blues and Rhythm. And they just did a piece on the Mambo Club and all the posters, which we'll see some later. So it's got an international reputation, and the posters are almost, well, they're very collectible. They go for a lot of money because Ruth Brown, Ray Charles, big names. The Mambo Club, yeah, there we go. Those are worth $1,000, I'm told, originals. And a fellow in town, let's see, I'll think of his name. He went to a barn sale, and there were a bunch of posters that the farmer had that he picked up, got them, went to the promoter and said, I'll take all your old posters off your hands. And he was cutting them up for caskets. So there went that retirement fund. Yeah, and the Mambo Club turned into the Early Bird Cafe when Mike Finnegan had it. Anybody go there? The Red Dog Inn. Now it's a church. Originally was an airplane hangar or building for Swallow aircraft. It's on Hillside, about 23rd and North. So I had a lot of fun there. I didn't go to the Mambo Club. That was the deal. I never heard any blues in Wichita. It was around, but I didn't go to rough clubs, not when I was 16. And then I got married, and the wife put a stop in all of that stuff, which they will do in their own inimitable way. And let's have the next one. Oh, there, Franklin Mitchell. He was a preacher. He had his own church. Started off playing as a real young guy, teenager, guitar and bass. Went to Chicago and was a session musician in Chicago, which means you have to be pretty good. Played, I said, what'd you play? And what he said, I don't know. They just came in with, here, play this track on this. So he doesn't know what record he's on. And he came back to Wichita from living in there. And he had a transformation from blues to religion. If you know African American history, that's a big thing. It's a big dichotomy. In fact, a lot of guys didn't want to talk. Well, one of them, when I recorded him and he played blues, he said, "Now turn off that recorder. I don't want to be playing blues now." He played in church. He was a real, we'll see him up in a minute, I hope. The Franklin was in a black carnival, Harlem to Havana. They started in Florida and went up to Alaska. And he's got a bunch of weird tales about that, or at least a sense of what that might have been like. I think that would make a good film. You know, a lot of interviews from people would make a good short story or a film, because a film is only a short story. You can't make a novel into a film. It can't be done. Jerry Childers, he was very sick when I interviewed him. He didn't really look like that most of his life. This is cancer. But in fact, his wife, also named Jerry, came in and she didn't like that picture at all after he passed away. When the exhibit went up to the Black Museum, she brought in another photo of him when he was younger. She wanted. Jerry and Jerry. You call him up? Is Jerry there? Which one? And that'll stump you. And then, he played the B3. He had it rigged so, it's a big organ. It was 350 pounds. The speaker's another 125. He had it rigged so he just kept it in the trailer, low trailer, and with a ramp on wheels. Played a lot of gigs. Went to LA. There's a good story about that in there, which I can't get into. Henry Walker, he just died recently, and his guitar is at the Wichita, or the Sedgwick County Museum. Probably up now. They have a guitar exhibit up. I think it's a 355. I thought it was a 345. Does it look like a 345? Yes. It's red? No. Oh man, his parents were poor and his dad made him work all the time. So he was a hard-working guy. He came up here and was a meat packer during the day and played gigs at night. Try doing that with your hands. Yeah. The first guitar he ever bought was a Les Paul Jr., which that'll tell you something. If you know how much they cost back then when he was a kid. Another one. There's Chuck. Old harmonica Chuck. Charlie Phillips. I spent a lot of time at his house. If you can see the mouthwash bottle on the harmonica rack that he used to augment his harmonica. And the guitar he found at the dump. They were just about ready to bulldoze it, and he jumped out of the truck and rescued it. And then at the end, after this project, I got the state historical society had a master artist program. Do you remember that? If you want to learn beadwork, or knitting, or something like folk arts. So I applied to be apprenticed to harmonica Chuck and got the gig. 18 lessons, $50 a piece, went to him. He blew it all on the biggest electric guitar you've ever seen. I mean, big, full body, like a rockabilly, early rockabilly guitar. I mean, it wasn't American. You couldn't get one for $900, but And then he couldn't get it like, by the time he was passing away, he still couldn't get it right. Couldn't get the same sound out of it, but he was happy. There he is young in a Beatles suit. He said a talent scout wanted him to go to LA. This scout that was out for talent, he said. But he said, no, I can't. He had 4 kids. He had to stay in Wichita. And he said, besides, I'm not as good as little Walter and those guys. And the talent scout said, every man has his own thing. You do your thing and they do theirs. And he said, the talent scout asked him 4 times. And the last time he said, you won't see me again. And Chuck said, I haven't seen him again, but I've seen guys who look like it.
So I have a question. The mouthwash. He cut the mouthwash bottle in half and put the harmonica up to blue
Up to,
to like change the resonance sort of thing for the.
I don't know, you'd have to ask him about that. I'm not a musicologist, although I've been accused of being one.
Interesting.
Yeah. He had the 904 club. He had his own club on 9th Street. She was one of the few women that came up in the interviews. A pianist. I don't know who the gentleman is. That's one of the Rosie Hughes photos, and Rosie or whoever took him. There's no identification for any of them. So that one had it. I didn't recognize her. Her name comes up in the interviews. I didn't get a chance to talk to her. I did talk to 2 women. Yeah, let's get to the next one. That's the religious fellow, Albert Tucker. And he came from the same part of the country that Barry Harris did, but he was a folk blues performer, like Chuck. Chuck played folk blues. He may have electrified it, but only 2 out of the 19 played the country style folk blues. And then that's his church guitar. That picture is from when he played at the opening of the exhibit. 200 people, including the director of the Kansas Humanities Council, came down from the throne of the northeast part of the state to Wichita.
Can I ask another question?
Is this going to be a habit or what?
Would you prefer I don't? I
No.
prefer it.
It helps me out, anything.
Well, I was wondering, you talked about why is there such a feeling that blues can't be like, why can't there be a kind of blues music that is also Christian or is also appropriate in church?
You know, I sold an Hammond organ to a church organist. He came over to try it out and he's playing along and he played something and said, oh, I can't play that. There's a distinction that I'm not privy to. I couldn't put into words. If I listened enough, I could probably come up with an explanation, but some tread the fence, but most of them, it's either one or the other, because the blues, you're going to hell. You play the blues, you're going to hell.
Makes me think of like Robert Johnson and the legend about blues.
No, that's a bad legend.
Uh-huh.
He did not sell his soul to the devil. That is Tommy Johnson. That was his legend. But people confuse it. I took a literature course from James Lee Burke. You know him? He's a pretty famous author. A writing course, and he was on to that. sell your soul to the devil to play the guitar. I didn't correct him. You know, I was a student. I needed a good grade. I used to go to his house and play blues. He was a good musician. Had an old Gibson flat top, a jumbo, Southern jumbo. But yeah, Albert, really good musician. I've got some of his music recorded. I recorded some Barry Harris too, but I don't know how good that is. Anyway, you know, I just had a 4-track recorder with 1 or 2 mics. I don't know what I'm doing. I didn't have the owl.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't have the technology, but I did what I could. So, oh, there's Jesse. He's the most famous of those that I recorded. Little Jesse Anderson wrote a lot of tunes. He worked at Chess Records, worked with Chess Records. And I said, were they hard to, you know, Chess Records, Leonard, and said, were they hard to deal with? And he said, you could get money out of them if you were a good beggar. You had to, because they didn't have royalty statements. I mean, you didn't know how many records you sold. They wouldn't tell you. They paid income tax on payola, I'll tell you that. And they declared the payola payment. So a lot of these guys help the art, but hurt the artist. If you're a musician, any guitar players in the house? What a crowd. I could just make up a bunch of stuff about guitars, couldn't I? Too late now, I'm already down the path of truth. Jesse was, oh, he had some great stories because he had a good memory from when he was young, growing up he was from Arkansas, moved to Tulsa, and then came up here. Well, I've really blown through the time. Are there any questions? Let's go, at least get through the tape. Yeah. Donald Dunn, he had a speakeasy called a musicians club. He said, I called it a musicians club. The police called it a speakeasy. But they let him have it because it kept people off the streets. It was an after hours joint at 13th and Hydraulic around there. Pretty big place. Okay. Charles Walker, what do you think he played? What does he look like?
Sax.
Was he a singer? Says vocals to your line. You gave me a clue.
Oh, okay, well, I forgot I put that on there. Yeah, he was, you can imagine he played with Willie Wright and the Sparklers. And they played 5 nights a week in the best black clubs, the Esquire and the Starlight. Give me a good one. And then there's one of the women, Mona Hicks, on her sick bed. She had a heart condition, but she had 4 kids and raised them singing because, quote, welfare wasn't doing nothing, honey. And she said, if I get a job in Great Bend or Hutchinson, I'd rent a house and bring the kids. She played with the jive tones a lot. Also, the Reverend we looked at earlier, Reverend Mitchell. Okay. Joe Latson was a drummer. Pretty good guy. He had an encounter with a blind drummer, Homer Osborne. He used to play with King Oliver. If you know King Oliver, that's the guy that Another famous quote, Louis Armstrong had to start with King Oliver. And Homer Osborne comes up a lot in the stories. Okay. Ray Valentine played with Jimi Hendrix and before he was big, and when he was in Nashville, Ray was in the Air Force, and Jimmy was in the Air Force, he was in. He broke his ankle parachuting. That might have been the Army. I can't exactly remember. And he said he thought Ray was crazy for staying in the Air Force. Ray wasn't exactly a blues player. He came from Washington here in the late 60s. But I put him in because he had some good stories. Okay, we're coming close to the end now. Barbara, that's the second woman. She really had an interesting life. She was one of the three sisters who started the African American Museum.
She a blues viola player?
No, she was a concert player and then got into country fiddle. She was playing in a country band and Hattiesburg, Mississippi. There was a guy who came all the time. And she asked somebody, who was this guy who was always coming to every gig? Said he's the head of the Ku Klux Klan here. So she went up and talked to him, and, jibed him a little bit. And she said, one time I said, why don't you get some pastel sheets? I heard another story that some famous blues band, it might have been Bobby Blue Bland, I think. They were going along, they had a flat tire, no spare, and a car comes up full of the Klan right behind them. This is in the South. And and the Klan helped him with the tire, helped him fix the tire. Because they were blues people, they were accountable. They were just musicians. So, not that I'm saying anything good about the Klan, although they were in Kansas, they were in Wichita, video. Is that the last one?
This is the last one.
Yeah, isn't that a pretty good bandstand shot? A funky old amp, a National, no drums. They were setting up to play Caddy and Webb. So now questions. Not all of those.
Well, I have one. You said at the beginning, you were talking about when you were pitching this project to the Kansas African American Museum that your goal is to discover the Wichita Blues sound.
Right.
Did you make some conclusions about what makes Wichita's blues scene?
In other words, you want to know how the book comes out without reading. Well, how does it end? Does he get the girl? Or
Yeah.
I came up with the idea that a blues sound may be at the time, maybe in the act of formation. That's what I believe I put in there. I did. I asked everybody in the interviews. Well, some of them thought they could, and some of them thought there was. The majority said no, there isn't. It's a mix of Texas and Chicago. But this book was reviewed in England by the Blues and Rhythm magazine, in France by a podcast or something. I don't know what something. It's in French, I know that. And the last two words are très recommand. So that, I believe that's good.
Great.
And then in Belgium, it was reviewed in Belgium in Dutch. I have no idea.
Do you think that critics take the blues more seriously in Europe than maybe some do in the, I feel like I've heard people say that it's blues is taken very seriously in Europe.
I don't have an opinion on that, although I know that Britain really got into it in the sixties, late fifties and sixties. They were really, I mean, there was an architect who wrote about the blues, #1 blues writer, along with Samuel Charters, David Evans, who wrote the foreword for the book. Anyway, his name's in there. Can't remember. He's dead now anyway. Paul, some British name. Any more questions? But I'll even know answer that. I mean, I got reviewed there more than I was reviewed here. So, although the academic library and newsletter or magazine reviewed the book, so and it won a notable book award. That doesn't happen every day. Happens once a year.
It's pretty good.
I got to go to Topeka. They let me in Topeka.
Wow.
That's the only award I ever got, except the one for not going to Topeka.
Here's a question. So you're a blues musician yourself, and you're still active in playing, right? So where do you know where can people go? I mean, what's the two questions? What's the blues scene like now in Wichita, and where can people go if they're interested in hearing some live blues?
Well, the blues scene now is called blues played rock. But blues is really boring music. I mean, 12 bar blues, if you know what's going to happen, it's like fraternity music. There are nuances and subtleties that happened in the beginning, in the 20s and 30s, and then again in the 50s, when Howlin' Wolf, Muddy Waters came up from Mississippi and plugged in to play. They brought that delicate flavor of the uninitiated into it. But now there is a blues society in Wichita that you can join. And they have events and blues jams. But have you heard of this song called Stormy Monday? You know, Stormy Monday. That should be taken out and shot. It's played and the thrill is gone. I mean, come on, how many times do you need to hear that? You want to get into some stuff. Blind Willie Johnson, Blind Lemon Jefferson, Blind Willie McTell, and then Charlie Patton, Son House. That's where Robert Johnson came in. A lot of Robert Johnson stuff is redone from the older. But Robert Johnson had a modern sound to it. You know, Eric Clapton considered him the best. That says something to me. So there's nothing wrong with Robert Johnson, but it could only go down from there, which it did. That's the only one I listen to, but I don't really listen to much anymore. And I like piano, I like barrel house piano, which is interesting. Country. When country left the blues, the interest is gone for me. It happened in the 40s. But there's still people who like blues in Wichita, but you hear a lot of rock, which I don't see anything wrong with that. You know, if people like it, can dance to it. Why not? If you need to call it blues to play it, okay. Any of the civilians?
Could you please say again the four influences of blues or the origins? I think you mentioned at the beginning.
The regions?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. KU, No, not Katy. Why did I think of that? Mississippi, Texas, the Piedmont, um, Mississippi and Texas are big. And
Chicago.
no, they came later. They're not really they're the origins of electric blues. Yeah, I used to know that. It'll come to me. Chicago, no. New York, no. New Orleans, no. New Orleans is jazz.
Thinking of Memphis.
What?
Memphis?
Yeah, Memphis. Memphis, thanks. Education pays off.
Spent 25 years in Mississippi.
Okay,
Also, when you mentioned Hattiesburg, Mississippi, I went to university,
which university was that?
Southern Mississippi.
Okay. I've been in Memphis a couple of times. Used to go to a blues conference in Arkansas, close to Memphis. Jug bands came out of Memphis. Jug bands are really interesting.
Very.
And just the Delta. I was on a panel with Elijah Wall, who's a pretty well-known writer on music. And he starts talking about Robert Johnson, this, like this. And then he said that, of course, he wasn't all that good. Like this. Wall is an iconoclast. So he wrote a book about Johnson, pointing out that other musicians were just as talented. And they were, but they weren't. I mean, they were facile and playing the guitar and smooth singing, like Big Bill Brunsey and Josh White. But
I think Johnson was innovative, but that's just my opinion.
you think he was what?
Innovative,
It was exceedingly innovative.
he was,
It was the Jimi Hendrix of his time.
yeah, he was the first to do a lot of things that were recorded.
Mhm. And he ended up crawling around like a dog. Poison. According to the latest research I saw, it could be something different now because there's so many conflicting. You know,
Generally accepted legend is that it was overruled.
yeah. I think well, if you listen to his lyrics, of his tunes, there's a lot of women go in and out.
Yeah.
She's a kind-hearted woman. She studies evil all the time. She's kind of a contradiction. Any more questions? Criticisms?
Well, thank you again.
Thank you.
It's really interesting.